Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I have another episode of the hardcore necromancy journey of preseason, I guess. It has been quite a ride. We are finally back doing World Tier 3 content, and we are back at the same point in the game where my first necromancer died in Helltide. Well, it turns out you have to do Helltide. Helltide just is the only source for Forgotten Souls, but I am being a lot more careful this time around. I think my very first Helltide, I'm actually using the 900 armor elixir. Now, at this time, I didn't know, but chat actually let me know, the cheat death elixir doesn't count as a normal elixir, so you can use it in addition to whatever elixir you wish. So that is a really big thing. I didn't know it at the time, though, but I am more prepared. Okay, the Helltide is not the first thing that I challenged on World Tier 3. Just to kind of at least acclimate to the difficulty, I continued my renown grind in the final act that I need for the 2,000 reward for Paragon bonus. I did a little bit of content in that. I got like about a level and maybe some change on World Tier 3 before stepping into my first Helltide. Now, if you are not playing hardcore, what you're going to want to do is ignore all that crap and jump into Helltide immediately. Helltide is not just the only place where you're going to get Forgotten Souls. Now that Nightmare Dungeons are giving so much more experience, since you're still going to need like a few hundred Forgotten Souls for any full character, it's much better that you're getting it at a point in the game where you can't really access those crazy experience scenarios. Nightmare Dungeons won't really activate their like crazy experience until World Tier 4. And while there is still some reason to do Helltides in World Tier 4, because right as you get into World Tier 4, you're going to want some of that sweet ancestral gear, and Helltide is fantastic for gearing. You still want to do maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 on difficulty 4. On difficulty 3, you really don't have a better option. On difficulty 3, the experience for Helltide is actually pretty comparable to any other activity, so it might seem a little bit slower. The experience curve, the different levels kind of changed a little bit as a result of that, but it is still worthwhile again in Tier 4 to do just a little bit. The idea is that you do the bulk of your Helltiding, collect the bulk of the Forgotten Souls that you'll need for the lifetime of your character on World Tier 3. When you're on World Tier 3, between the levels of like high 40s to 50-ish when you want to start getting into World Tier 3, all the way when you exit in like low 60s or close to 70, or maybe actually at 70 if you're playing hardcore. I haven't quite made up my mind when I want to move on to World Tier 4 for this character, but I suspect it is going to be around level 65 or so. But again, we have to determine that as we play. You're going to want to get the bulk of the Helltiding done on World Tier 3. Even though it might be a little bit less experience than another activity, it might not be. It's a pretty decent experience. It is just the most efficient way to source those Forgotten Souls that you'll need later for the character power. Now, Helltide can be pretty challenging. There are some pitfalls, as you've seen. I've died in here. The meteors, as you saw there a second ago, are a really big rip factor. The meteors can actually drop when your character is climbing up and down from cliffs, so you can actually die from meteors. Like you might be playing like a Sork, and it's like, hey, if I'm about to die, just press the flame shield to go immune, or I use a health potion. Actually, when you're climbing a cliff, you can't do that. Okay, so what you really need for a new reason now, one that I just mentioned, is the bubble legendary aspect. The 90-second cooldown immunity bubble that will actually save you from a double tap of meteors when you're going up and down a stair in a Helltide, okay? It sounds really stupid, but the more that I play hardcore, the more I feel there is a lot of value in that aspect, and I highly recommend it for you guys. So a few things are happening on the screen now, and I kind of wanted to talk about the evolution of the build. When I first made my first hardcore necromancer, the idea was that it was going to be a bone spear necro where I would still use a full array of skeletons in order to give me resources, tankiness, corpses. Pretty similar to the first necromancer build guide I put out before the game launched, but leaning more into relying on bone spear for the damage. minion survivability and their utility has actually been very good now that we've played throughout the game through and through, but their damage does seem to struggle to keep up with other builds, and Bone Spear's damage is actually exceeding maybe almost all other builds. So it made sense for me to do that build, but as I played hardcore, as I just missed the minion playstyle more, I think there is a reason to play full minions in hardcore, and that reason is as follows. Even though Bone Spear builds are definitely going to be better in like high world tiers and bossing perhaps, most of the content that you do in hardcore is same level content. So you're going to have kind of different requirements of a character that you make in hardcore than one that you make in softcore. In softcore, your aspirational goals are going to be to do nightmare dungeons that are really high level, approaching level 100, if not level 100, and, you know, having the joy of killing world bosses in mere seconds. In hardcore, you're going to be happy if you kill world bosses at all, and you're never really going to step into content that has a chance to one-shot you, which means you're probably not going to do nightmare dungeons over level 70 because, well, there's no real reason to. The main goal of playing hardcore is, well, just kind of exploring the game, creating a build as you go and making it work. Just the joy of playing Diablo 4, more or less. But also the main accomplishment, and one they've even outlined with their Lilith challenge for their first 1,000 participants, just making it to level 100 and not dying in the process. A job I have thoroughly failed on my first Necromancer, but now seeing as this is my second, I took this notion in greater regard and thought that a pure minion build would actually be a lot stronger. And the idea is that a pure minion build, your minions are still going to be there even if you're like disconnected. This is one of the very best builds in the game if you have lost the control of your character for like 10 seconds. Most of your damage will still be happening. Even though you often need your minions to attack, you have to use like a skill. If your character is being attacked, your minions will react to it. So if your character gets attacked, you don't need to actually press a button for your minions to counterattack on your behalf. That is very important. If you really focus on it, I think you can actually get a lot of passive damage off of your minions. So we're not talking about Ring of Mendeln builds here, where, yes, you do like crazy damage, but you'd actually need to use your character to proc the Ring of Mendeln. So it can be quite a challenge sometimes. Look at that inventory. That's a post-first Helltide inventory. Jesus. That inventory, that's as many legendaries as I've found on this character. I just found it in the last hour in my first World Tier 3 Helltide. Absolutely insane. You have to do these Helltides. But yes, the minion-based Necromancer, you're just going to have that power when you're AFK. I'm also going to be using Bone Storm. I'm going to be using Bone Storm with the Shielding Storm aspect, which gives me a 5% of my life barrier each time it hits. It counts the Golem's hits, and I'm actually seriously thinking of using the aspect that makes it shadow damage and has it do shadow damage over time. It takes Bone Spear's hits and multiplies them by 3 because the shadow damage keeps going over 2 seconds. So you get far better disobedience stacks and far more barrier count per second. And thinking of dropping the Blizzard aspect from the Cold Mages for it, for a number of reasons that I think I might discuss in a different video once I have a bit more experience for it. But the idea is, if I'm like AFK or if I'm disconnected, if I'm attacked, my minions will counter. If I have Bone Storm up and I'm attacked and I disconnect, I'm probably just not going to take any damage because, well, the Bone Storm is going to keep giving me a constant barrier. Now, there's another aspect to this. Let's skip the gearing here a little bit. The other aspect to the build is that you really want to use a scythe. Even though I'm using a sword, it's just a matter of opportunity. Even though you might have goals to use certain items, certain stats, certain legendaries, certain uniques perhaps in Diablo 4, you're still playing the game based on what opportunity gives you. You're still playing the game based on what you happen to find. And I happened to find a sword that was quite good, and I actually hadn't even found a scythe yet that matched it, even though scythes do more damage for minions. Minions have a set attack time. So it doesn't matter if you use a 1.2 wand or a 0.9 two-handed scythe. They'll still attack at the same rate. Okay, but if you use a scythe, they'll do more damage because the base damage of the scythe is much higher than any other weapon because it is the slowest, and the thing that is compared item to item for balance in Diablo 4 is the DPS. So what that actually means is if a scythe of the same DPS compared to a two-handed sword will do 11% more damage just because of the difference in attack speed on the item itself. Now, swords can get crit multiplier, but your minions only get 30% of that. Your minions only get 30% of your crit chance. It's actually extremely hard to do meaningful damage through crit. Now, if you're playing a Ring of Men down build, that changes completely for a multitude of other reasons. But if you're playing a full minion build, you're going to want to use a scythe. So how does that tie into hardcore survivability? Simple. Scythes have lots of life on kill. Like a lot. Like hundreds of life on kill. And also, you can socket it with skulls. You might be thinking, Kripp, what are you talking about? Socket it with skulls? Isn't there anything better on a Minion Mancer? The answer is no, there is not. You can use like crit damage against vulnerable or crit damage against crowd control, but both of those things don't really have much of an impact on your minions, especially if you're not scaling crit to begin with, which I am not. So we're going to socket skulls in the weapon for even more life on hit. Might even go through like 400 life on kill. Life on kill. The thing about that is your minions get your life on kill, and it makes a very noticeable difference. In fact, it is not something that you might think it works, but if you pay close attention to it, you'll see that it makes a massive difference. Even using a sword, which I am, the skull and the sword giving a small heal as you get kills makes a really big difference. I don't know why. I don't know if it's like multiplied by like damage mods. I don't know if skeletons' survivability is weak just because they have like no health. It's very possible, by the way. But it makes a really big difference. It means that your minions will constantly be alive if they're killing. And it means that if you disconnected, you're constantly healing if your minions are doing enough damage to kill the things around you. And again, I think that combined with the fact that I'll also be using the immunity bubble legendary aspect is going to make this one of the very best characters for surviving same level content, especially when the servers lag or I'm getting disconnected. So that is the goal, that is the journey, and I wanted to just quickly go over the skills that I'm using. So we're using the skeletons, we're using both skeletons, we're using corpse tendrils, 5 out of 5 corpse tendrils. I think I have like 5 CDR on my helmet, and we're using Decrepify. We're not using any damage skill besides Bone Storm, and Bone Storm only activates minion engagement, minion combat when you first press the button. You can't just run into some mobs. Now, if you get attacked, it'll trigger it. If your golem gets an attack in with the button, that will trigger it, but you can't always do that. So the goal of the build is to have Decrepify on everything. In the last patch, they changed it so when you curse something, your minions engage combat with it. Now, it works, but it doesn't work. What am I talking about? If you curse something like in the top left or right corner of your screen, your minions will not go to it. You need to be somewhat close, especially when it comes to the top corners, when you curse for your minions to engage. This is different than using like Bone Spear. You can use Bone Spear to hit like enemies in the top corners of your screen, so more than an effective screen away. You can do that and your minions will engage them. So it's not as good of an engage skill as like Bone Spear, but honestly, it's pretty good. It's good enough, I would say. I think the character has been working out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it. I am spamming the curse like crazy because I'm still using the Cold Mage's ability to give you 2 essence when they hit with... I think we're just doing some items here. Yeah, let's move into the next. So I'm using 2 Essence when the Cold Mages hit, and we're going to be stacking attack speed. The goal is to get the attack speed legendary aspect on the two-hander to double it, because attack speed is king, and it also affects the Golem. And if you've been watching these videos, this is going to be a build that's going to be having a lot of its damage come from the Golem. Diablo 4's first Golemancers is currently in the works. So we have Decrepify. Everything's going to be Decrepified. The Decrepify cooldown reduction and stun procs based off of your lucky hits. You're going to want to have some lucky hit, but because we're scaling attack speed, I'm going to use 3 Cold Mages with the aspect and the amulet. We're going to be stacking additional attack speed on the Paragon tree for the Golem, and the Golem's base attack is a cleave. We're hoping to have enough cooldown reduction for full Bone Storm uptime, constant tendrils as the only source of vulnerable, and Blood Mist on demand. Okay, so Blood Mist is the last one there. That's kind of the emergency button. We have the Golem button. We're using the Golem with the 10% extra health and extra Thorns. Thorns just helps with, actually I'll talk about Thorns in a second. And that helps with the taunt, so we have the CC from the Bone Golem, and we have the Bone Storm for a number of uses as well. Sure, let's just quickly touch about Thorns. So I didn't know how much Thorns I want to put in the build, but every Necromancer build should have some Thorns if you're using the Curse, because Thorns damage, if it's you or your minions, can proc lucky hit effects. So it's actually quite a lot in some cases. I actually have 3 points in the Thorns passive. I don't plan on using a shield. I don't plan on using Razor Plate. I think the opportunity cost of the defensive stats for using those options, like the Razor Plate, just not going to happen. For a shield, I don't want to lose a two-hander. I don't want to use a life on kill. I don't want to use the doubling of the attack speed on the aspect. So I don't think I'm going to pull the trigger on those, okay? But Thorns is quite good in general. But you don't want to play a Necromancer fully on Thorns. The legendary aspect for Thorns that has a chance to make your Thorns damage a pop in a radius around you, like AoE Thorns, that one's really good. It's kind of the core of the Thorns build if you're playing a Barbarian. Now that aspect actually works for Necromancers, but not for the Necromancer minions. So it's actually really bad. Now it does make it that Thorns is still pretty useful in a few ways, but it makes it that you don't really want a build fully on Thorns. Also, Decrepify is ridiculously strong if you're playing minions. Corpse Tendrils is just ridiculously strong, so you're going to use that. It's one of your main sources of vulnerable if you're playing minions. So if the mobs are crowd controlled, there's no Thorns happening at all. Okay? But still, I think Thorns is pretty good, and this is why. There is one moment in the game where you and your minions are getting completely wrecked, and you're about to see one of those moments right here, perhaps. Maybe not, I killed this pretty quick. And it's when your minions are getting like crowd controlled and hit with like AoE mortars and that kind of stuff. Your minions will not avoid crowd control. There's no way to make anything besides your golem unstoppable, so your stuff is getting crowd control like crazy. That is when your Necromancer, that's when a Minion Mancer is at its weakest. When your Necromancer and its minions are at their weakest, Thorns is a fantastic stat. Because if your skeletons are getting pelted by mortars, having any amount of Thorns given all the splashing AoE hits could actually kill some of the sources of this, and you're going to deal some damage as opposed to no damage. So, in my experience, Thorns is a good stat for a minion-based Necromancer, but you really don't want to make an entire character based on that affix, let's say. Except maybe for PvP, but that'll be something else. That might be another video. For now, hope you guys enjoy the continuation of the hardcore journey, and we'll see you next time.